The old man drove the school bus every day. Nobody asked his name. Nobody cared. Until something happened on that fateful trip, and he had to take command, organize, and lead a group of students to safety. When rescue workers asked, "Where did you learn to respond so quickly?" He just smiled, rolled up his sleeve, revealing a special tattoo that only 3 people in history had ever worn. If you believe there are pasts that need no boasting but are always there when needed most, follow this story to the end. Walt Briggs, 71, was a high school bus driver in suburban Georgia, driving the same fixed route every morning from farms to the town center. He lived alone, had no social media presence, no wife or children, wore long-sleeve shirts daily, a low-brimmed cap, and spoke so rarely that students nicknamed him Silent Walt. In the driver's cabin, he played no music, made no conversation, only saying, "Sit down, fasten your seatbelts," in an even, deep voice. A group of students often mocked him behind his back, calling him the useless old man. One morning when a student asked, "What did you do before driving a bus?" Walt simply replied, "Lived." Another student noticed a faded tattoo on his wrist, a skull with wings and 3 intertwined sevens. The group laughed, typical failed biker style. But a gym teacher sitting near the driver suddenly paused when he saw that tattoo. He said nothing, only bowed his head respectfully to Walt when exiting the bus, his eyes full of respect. Walt had been driving the same route for 8 years. Every morning he arrived at the bus depot 45 minutes early to personally inspect his vehicle, checking tire pressure, fluid levels, emergency exits, with a thoroughness that exceeded standard protocol. The school administration appreciated his reliability, but knew little about him. His employment application contained the minimum required information, with most of his history reduced to government service, with no elaboration. His references were impeccable but equally mysterious. Former employers who spoke highly of his character, but offered few concrete details. The students who rode his bus route were primarily from the farming communities that surrounded Baker County High. Many were the children of hard-working families, some facing significant challenges at home. Walt knew each of their names, though he rarely used them. He noted their daily patterns, who sat with whom, who needed extra time to board, who sometimes came without proper winter clothing. During winter months, the heat in the back rows sometimes failed. Without announcing it, Walt began wearing an extra jacket which he would casually forget on an empty seat for any student who looked cold. It would always be returned the next day, no words exchanged. The gym teacher, Coach Delaney, was the only staff member who seemed to watch Walt with unusual interest. A former Army Ranger, Delaney had noticed the tattoo during Walt's second week. Since then, he'd maintained a respectful distance, never asking questions, but always offering a military crisp nod when their paths crossed. Some of the more observant students noticed other peculiarities. Walt's perfect posture, even at his age, the way his eyes constantly scanned the road with heightened awareness, how he always positioned himself where he could observe all entry points to any room. When waiting outside the bus, he never stood with his back exposed. The school principal once attempted friendly conversation about Walt's background during a staff appreciation lunch. "Army?" she'd guessed with a smile. Walt had smiled back politely. "Something like that," he'd answered, before smoothly changing the subject to the upcoming basketball season. And so the routine continued, day after day, with most students seeing only a quiet old man behind the wheel, someone easily dismissed, easily forgotten in the busy social hierarchy of high school life. Until that rainy Thursday morning changed everything. One rainy morning, on the Marshville Bridge route, a truck ahead lost control, crashing into the guardrail. The school bus had to swerve sharply, sliding off its lane, trapped between a drainage ditch and the edge of a steep slope. Students screamed. Some fell from their seats. Cell phones had no signal. Walt calmly pulled the handbrake, turning around. "Everyone quiet. Those who can stand, move to the back. Anyone injured, stay put. Don't move." Nobody listened immediately, but suddenly his voice deepened, becoming decisive, clearly commanding. He ordered older students to assist younger ones, chose correct seating positions to prevent the tilting bus from rolling. One student yelled, "Who are you to give orders?" Walt rolled up his sleeve, revealing the full tattoo along his left arm, A mission map, markings of the Marine SFG-3 combat force. A student gasped. I've read classified materials. That's the command insignia for Marine Recon. Walt's voice lowered. Correct. And now I need everyone to do exactly as I say, like when I commanded soldiers under artillery fire. The students fell silent. Each order was followed. Walt blocked the wheels with rocks, stabilized anchor points with safety belts. He helped each student escape through the emergency exit, wrapping raincoats around their heads. The last to be rescued was a boy with a broken arm, whom Walt carried on his back across the slippery slope. The rain intensified, reducing visibility to mere yards. The bus creaked ominously with each gust of wind, its position becoming more precarious by the minute. Inside, Walt had taken complete control of the situation, with a calm efficiency that seemed to physically change him. His hunched posture straightening, his movements becoming precise and deliberate. Johnson, Miller, you two are responsible for the younger students, he directed two seniors. Count heads, keep them together. Morrison, you've got first aid training from that summer camp. Check for injuries. Some of the younger students were crying, but the presence of Walt's unwavering authority provided a center of gravity in the chaos. When he opened the emergency exit, the wind howled through the bus. We'll form a human chain, he instructed. Strongest at the anchor points. Move diagonally down the slope, not straight down. One by one, he supervised their evacuation, positioning each student with tactical precision, adjusting the formation as the terrain demanded. When Ryan Matthews, a sophomore with a broken arm, needed assistance, Walt didn't hesitate. Despite his age, he lifted the boy onto his back with a strength that belied his years. Put your good arm around my neck and hold tight, he instructed. This isn't my first extraction under difficult conditions. The slope was treacherous with mud, but Walt navigated it with the footwork of someone trained to move through far worse terrain. At one point, he lost footing but recovered with a reflexive movement that spoke of muscle memory developed over decades. When they reached safer ground, Walt established a perimeter, positioned the students in a sheltered area beneath a highway overpass, and sent the two most reliable seniors to flag down help from the road above. A freshman girl, still shaking with fear, looked up at Walt with new eyes. How are you not scared, Mr. Briggs? Walt knelt beside her, his voice gentler now. Fear is just information. It tells you something's wrong, but it doesn't tell you to panic. You acknowledge it, then act anyway. It was the most anyone had ever heard him speak at once. I witnessed that scene with tears in my eyes, not because of the rain, but because I never thought an old man who was mocked would be such a quiet hero. Type leader, if you believe the truly strong person is the calmest in chaos. When rescue workers arrived, finding students lined up in order, no one panicking, the paramedic asked, "Who's in charge here?" A student pointed one, "Him." Walt nodded, "Nothing more needed. The kids are all fine. I've checked each one." A rescue worker spotted the tattoo and immediately called the nearest military base. Hours later, a colonel from the Marine Corps appeared, walking straight to Walt, giving him a formal salute. "Commander Briggs, I never thought I'd meet you as a school bus driver." The students were shocked. One boy asked quietly, "You're really a Marine commander?" Walt smiled. "I was. Now I just want to be the one who gets the next generation safely to class." Afterward, news stories began circulating. The silent driver turns out to be a living legend of the Marines. Former comrades sent tribute videos from around the country. An old soldier wept in one video. "Briggs once led our entire unit out of an encirclement when both my legs were broken. He's still doing the same thing, but for our children and grandchildren." The high school where Walt worked organized an honorary ceremony. He refused to stand on the platform, but when the band played taps, Walt stood at attention, hand over heart, eyes glistening. After the ceremony, all the students from that bus wrote a handwritten line. "We thought you were just a driver, but you're the first commander who taught us what it truly means to be human." The school gymnasium was packed beyond capacity. Teachers, parents, students, and local officials had gathered for what was officially called a community appreciation event, though everyone knew it was really about Walt. The school principal, initially apologetic about not knowing Walt's background, had recovered her composure and orchestrated the event with appropriate dignity. No circus, no excessive fuss, just the kind of respectful acknowledgement that a man of Walt's caliber deserved. A Marine color guard had arrived unannounced that morning, requesting permission to participate. They now stood at perfect attention at the side of the gymnasium, flags held steady. As the band finished playing, the colonel who had appeared at the accident site stepped to the microphone. His uniform gleamed with decorations, yet he spoke with humility. For those who don't know me, I'm Colonel James Harrington. 25 years ago, I was a young lieutenant serving under Commander Walter Briggs in a unit whose name and missions remain classified to this day. He paused, looking directly at Walt, who sat uncomfortably in the front row. What I can tell you is this. The man you know as your bus driver is responsible for some of the most crucial, covert operations in modern military history. His leadership saved not just his men, but potentially thousands of civilian lives across 3 continents. A murmur passed through the crowd. The tattoo some of you noticed, the skull with wings and 3 sevens, was worn by only 3 commanders in the history of our specialized unit. It represents operations so successful they altered the course of conflicts without the public ever knowing they occurred. Walt shifted in his seat, eyes fixed on the floor. After his distinguished service, Commander Briggs declined promotions, medals, and recognition. He chose instead to disappear into civilian life. When asked why, he told his superior officers, "The reward for doing your duty isn't praise. It's knowing you did your duty." The colonel gestured to the Marine color guard, who presented arms in perfect unison. Today, we don't celebrate Walter Briggs because he was a hero in combat, though he was. We celebrate him because when he took off the uniform, he continued to live by the same code, placing others' safety above his own, leading without seeking credit, serving without requiring recognition. As the ceremony concluded, students approached Walt one by one. Many had prepared statements, but most found themselves wordless in his presence, offering only handshakes or awkward hugs that Walt accepted with quiet dignity. Linda Chen, a sophomore who had been on the bus, finally asked the question many wondered. "Why a school bus driver, Mr. Briggs? You could have done anything." Walt considered her question thoughtfully. "In my previous work, I saw too many lives ended before they began. Driving you all to school safely, it's about making sure you get your beginning." It was perhaps the most personal thing he had ever shared. Walt continued driving the bus. But now when he stopped at pickup points, every student stood at attention when boarding. One day they noticed he arrived late. A student asked, "Why don't you retire?" He smiled. "Because I once swore, never leave position until the mission is complete." On the front seat of the bus now hung a small wooden plaque. "Commanded men into battle. Now commands respect with silence." When he passed away peacefully 6 years later, the funeral was held at the school's football field. Over 700 former students attended, all wearing shirts with the words, "I rode with the commander." Walt's final years had transformed both him and the school. Though still quiet by nature, he occasionally shared carefully edited stories from his service days, providing context rather than graphic details, focusing on lessons of teamwork and resilience rather than combat. The school established a leadership program in his name, emphasizing the qualities Walt embodied: quiet competence, putting others first, and calm under pressure. Students competed eagerly for positions, understanding now that leadership wasn't about being the loudest or most popular, but about being the most reliable when circumstances turned difficult. On Walt's 75th birthday, the school had surprised him with a restored 1968 Mustang, the car he had mentioned once in passing as the vehicle he had owned before enlisting. Former students had located, purchased, and renovated it through a community fundraising effort. Walt had accepted it with uncharacteristic emotion, running his hand along its frame like greeting an old friend. His passing, though not unexpected given his age, still left the community in mourning. The funeral procession stretched for miles, his Mustang leading, followed by his yellow school bus, driven by Coach Delaney and filled with Walt's favorite students from across the years. At the service, no military official spoke. Instead, students from each year of his tenure shared brief stories, how Walt had noticed when they needed help, had demonstrated through actions rather than words what integrity looked like, had shown up consistently when others hadn't. Some people don't need to remind you who they are, because when you need them, they'll stand up without asking why. Subscribe to TT Hero Stories if you believe real heroes live among us, silent but never ordinary. TT Hero Stories, because some heroes never stop serving.